Welcome back, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into a topic, well, you might not think about that often, but stick with us. It gets really interesting. It's all about academic research, and specifically how transparent qualitative research actually is. We're going to focus on those interviews with top executives, the kind that you see quoted in like all the big business books and articles.
It is fascinating, isn't it? We just sort of eat up these insights, like trying to get into the minds of these leaders, right? But I don't think we often stop and think, wait a minute, how did they get this information? Could someone else do the same research, and get the same results?
And that is the exact question that Guinness and Solarino tackled in their article.
Yeah.
It was for the Strategic Management Journal. And they looked at 52 articles.
Oh, wow.
All from that same journal that used interviews with these elite informants as their main source of data.
Yeah.
So they wanted to see how transparent these studies really were.
I see, yeah.
So to do that, they came up with 12 criteria to assess transparency.
Okay.
So think of it like a checklist. It covered everything from how researchers chose their interview subjects to like how they analyzed the data and even whether they shared their raw data.
Oh, wow.
With others, right?
Right.
So they had this checklist. They had 52 articles. What did they find?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Braver for this.
Yeah.
None of the 52 articles met all 12 transparency criteria.
Oh, wow.
Not a single one.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
None of them?
Nope.
That's kind of mind-blowing. I mean, this is like a top-tier academic journal.
Right.
You'd think that transparency would like be a given.
You would think, yeah. But the reality is there's this big gap between what should be happening and what is happening in research.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. What kinds of things were these articles missing?
Sure.
Give us some examples.
Yeah, so one of the biggest ones was the researcher's positionality.
Okay.
So, like, were they an insider at the company that they were studying, or were they an outsider?
Right.
You would think that would be important to know, right?
Sure.
Because it could potentially influence their access to information, the types of questions that they asked, even like how the executives responded to them. But most of the articles were silent on this point.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Another big one was sampling procedures.
Okay.
So how did they decide, which executives to interview? Was it random? Was it based on certain criteria? Did they just talk to, whoever was available? Again, that kind of information is, crucial for understanding the context of the research.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it was just completely unclear.
So, like, if you wanted to, like, replicate one of these studies, you wouldn't even know, like, where to begin. You wouldn't know who to talk to, how to find them. It would be a nightmare.
It would be a nightmare, exactly. And that's one of the, key reasons why transparency matters, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about making sure that the research is accurate. It's about making sure it's replicable.
Right.
Right. If nobody else can repeat the study and, get similar results, how can you, be confident in those findings?
That's such a good point. It's like you're reading a recipe, but it leaves out like key ingredients or instructions.
Yeah.
You might still be able to like make something.
Yeah.
But it's probably not going to turn out the way that it was, supposed to.
Right. Exactly. And in the world of research, those missing ingredients can have, serious consequences.
Okay, so we've got missing information about the researcher, missing information about the participants.
Yeah.
Anything else that stood out as like particularly lacking?
Well, there was one other area that I found particularly interesting, and it was the handling of power dynamics.
Okay.
Right. So we're talking about, interviewing some of the most powerful people in the business world. These aren't like your average research subjects.
Right.
There's a lot of potential for subtle biases to creep in, both on the part of the researcher and the executive.
Right. So you mean like maybe the executives are more likely to like give answers that make them look good or that align with the researchers' like preconceived notions, or maybe the researchers like subconsciously trying to like please the executive.
Yes.
In order to get like access to more information.
Exactly. Those kinds of dynamics are like really hard to avoid, but they're rarely acknowledged, let alone addressed in these articles.
Right.
It's like there's this unspoken agreement to just pretend that like everything is perfectly objective,
Yeah.
then, we all know that's not the case.
Right. So what you're saying is, like, even in a top-tier academic journal,
Yeah.
there's this real lack of transparency when it comes to, like, these kinds of qualitative studies.
Yeah.
And that lack of transparency makes it really hard to know how much we can trust the findings.
That's the unfortunate reality.
But there was one exception, right?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that one article was at least somewhat transparent about, like, who the key informant was.
That's right. It was an article by Schaffer and Hillman published back in 2000, and they were actually pretty upfront about the fact that their key informant had experience in both state and federal government relations.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't, a ton of detail, but it was definitely more than most of the other articles provided.
I remember reading that one.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that background about the informant, like, really did add this interesting layer to their insights.
Yes.
It made their perspective even, like, richer and more nuanced.
Exactly. And that's a perfect example of why transparency is so important, right? It doesn't just help us, assess the validity of the research. It also enriches our understanding of the findings.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much we're missing out on
Right.
because of this lack of transparency.
It's like we're only getting half the story.
Yeah.
You see the polished conclusions, but the messy, fascinating process of, like, getting there
Right.
is hidden from view.
Exactly. And that process is so important.
Right.
It's where all the learning happens. It's where the unexpected discoveries are made.
Right.
But without, that transparency, that whole dimension of the research is just lost.
Okay, so we've established that, like, there's a real problem here,
Yeah.
but what can we do about it?
Right.
I mean, we're not researchers ourselves,
Right.
so we can't exactly, like, force these academics to be more transparent.
True. But we can still make a difference. I think, for one thing, we can be more discerning consumers of research.
Okay.
We can ask those tough questions like, how was this study conducted?
Right.
Who were the participants?
Right.
What potential biases, might be at play here?
So it's about shifting our mindset from passive acceptance to, like, active questioning.
Yes.
Don't just take the findings at face value. Like,
Yeah.
dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
Look for those methodological details.
Exactly. And if those details are missing, that's a red flag.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean that the research is bad,
Right.
but it does mean you should approach, those conclusions with maybe a healthy dose of skepticism.
It's like checking the nutrition label, before you buy a food product.
Right.
You want to know what you're really getting, not just be swayed by the, like, flashy packaging.
That's a great analogy. And just like with food labeling, there are ways to encourage more transparency in research. For example, journals could require authors to provide more, detailed information about their methods or, even to share their raw data.
Right. That makes sense. Like, if journals set, like, higher standards for transparency, researchers would be more likely to meet them.
Exactly. And there are already some journals doing this.
Right.
But it needs to become the norm, not the exception.
Right. What about those open data initiatives
Yes.
that we hear about? Could those help with this issue?
Absolutely. The more researchers share their data, the easier it is for others to scrutinize their methods and, try to replicate their findings.
Yeah.
And it creates this culture of accountability and, helps to weed out flawed research.
So it's not just about, like, individual researchers being more transparent.
Right.
It's about creating a system
Yes.
that, like, incentivizes and rewards transparency.
Precisely. It's about shifting the culture of research away from secrecy and towards openness.
Right. And that shift benefits, like, everyone.
Yes.
Right. Not just, like, other researchers.
Right.
But, like, anyone who relies on research to make informed decisions.
Exactly. Whether you're a business leader, a policymaker, or, just somebody who is trying to make sense of the world,
Right.
you need to be able to trust, the research that you're reading.
Right.
And transparency is the foundation of that trust.
So, like, what's the main takeaway here?
Yeah.
What do we want our listeners to, like, walk away with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that research is a process, not just a product.
Okay.
And that process needs to be transparent if we want to have confidence in those results.
Right.
So the next time you read, a fascinating study about how CEOs make decisions or, the secrets to successful leadership, just take a moment to ask yourself, how do they actually arrive at these conclusions? Can I trust this process?
It's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
Like, don't just be, like, wowed by the findings.
Right.
Be curious about, like, the journey that led to them.
And if that journey is shrouded in secrecy, that's a sign to be cautious. Demand more transparency. Ask those tough questions. Don't settle for, easy answers.
Well said.
Yeah.
So, to sum up our deep dive today,
Yeah.
even in top-tier academic journals, transparency and qualitative research, especially when it comes to those elite informant interviews,
Yes.
is often lacking.
Yeah, and that lack of transparency makes it difficult, if not impossible, to know how much we can trust those findings.
Right. But there is hope.
Yes.
Right? By, being more discerning readers, supporting journals and initiatives that promote, transparency.
Yes.
And advocating for, like, a more open research culture.
Right.
We can all play a role in ensuring that the research we rely on is as trustworthy as possible.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge is only as valuable as its foundation.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Going beyond, like, just the headlines, the sound bites.
Right.
And really getting into, like, the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
Of how knowledge is created,
It's like it's like the difference between, admiring a finished painting and understanding, like, the artist's technique.
Right.
The brush strokes, the layers of color.
Right.
The more you understand that process, the deeper your appreciation.
Right, and the better equipped you are to, like, judge the quality of the work.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What if things were different? Like, what if journals actually required researchers to be more transparent?
Right.
Would it change the kinds of research that gets done? Would we see a shift away from, like, chasing those flashy results?
Right.
And towards more rigorous, replicable studies?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It makes you think about, the incentives that drive research and how we could create a system that really prioritizes transparency
Right.
and replicability.
Because at the end of the day, like, what's the point of all this research?
Right.
If we can't trust the process that produced it.
Exactly. Knowledge is only as valuable as its foundation.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of research transparency. Until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on. And don't be afraid to ask those tough questions.